For 24 years, one question defined the disappearance of Asha Degree. Why did a 9-year-old girl walk out of her home before dawn and never come back? On February 14, 2000, Asha disappeared from her family's home in Shelby, North Carolina. There was no obvious sign of forced entry, no confirmed explanation for why she left, and no trace of where she went after the last confirmed sightings. Then, more than a year later, investigators found something that seemed almost impossible. Asha's backpack. It wasn't found near her home. It was discovered more than 20 miles away, along Highway 18, wrapped inside plastic garbage bags. And inside were objects that raised even more questions, including a shirt that did not belong to Asha and a children's book from her school library. For years, those clues produced theories, but no answer. Then, in September 2024, investigators searched multiple properties connected to a local family. And for the first time, court documents revealed something that changed the case completely. Investigators no longer believed Asha was simply a missing child. They believed she was the victim of a homicide whose body had been concealed. But believing that happened is not the same as proving who did it. And that distinction is where this story becomes much more complicated. Because the new evidence points toward people who have never been charged. And the strongest clues are more than 2 decades old. So the question is no longer simply, why did Asha leave home? It is, what happened after she walked into the darkness, and how much of that story can investigators actually prove? Asha Jacquilla Degree was 9 years old when she disappeared. She was a 4th grader at Falston Elementary School and played basketball for her school. Her family described her as shy, intelligent, competitive, and deeply concerned about other people's feelings. Her mother, Aquila Degree, later remembered her daughter as a child who wanted people around her to be happy. To her family, Asha wasn't a mystery. She was their daughter. Their little girl. And on the night she disappeared, nothing about the circumstances seemed to make sense. The date was February 14th. Valentine's Day. It was also her parents' wedding anniversary. And sometime during the early morning hours, Asha left the bedroom she shared with her older brother. At approximately 2:30 a.m., her father, Harold, checked on the children. Asha was there. By approximately 6:15 to 6:30 a.m., her parents discovered she was gone. Her book bag was gone too. There was no obvious sign that someone had broken into the house. Investigators eventually concluded that Asha had apparently left on her own. But that created the first major contradiction. Because the weather was bad. And Asha was 9. Why would a child leave a safe home in the middle of the night? The first confirmed clues came from the road. Around 4 a.m., motorists reported seeing a young girl walking along Highway 18. She was moving away from the direction of the Degree home. One witness reportedly went back to check on the girl. But by the time they returned, she had left the roadway and disappeared into the woods. Other reports eventually suggested that Asha may have been approached by, or possibly entered, a green vehicle. Investigators later described the possible vehicle as a green 1970s-era Lincoln Continental Mark IV, Ford Thunderbird, or similar vehicle. That distinction matters. Because if Asha had simply become lost and was looking for help, a vehicle could represent an opportunity for rescue. But if investigators were right that she entered a vehicle voluntarily, another possibility emerged. Someone may have been expecting her. We don't know that. It was never proven. But it became one of the most important questions in the investigation. Because Asha did not simply vanish from her bedroom. She was reportedly seen outside, walking. And then she disappeared from the road. The response was enormous. Search teams covered the surrounding area. Investigators used tracking and human remains detection dogs, horses, ATVs, dive teams, aerial searches, neighborhood canvasses, and interviews. But there was a problem. Asha had disappeared in 2000. There was no smartphone location history. No social media trail. No network of street cameras. No modern digital footprint to reconstruct her final movements. The investigation depended heavily on people remembering what they saw, and physical evidence that had survived. And then came one of the strangest discoveries in the entire case. On August 3, 2001, construction workers in Burke County discovered a backpack near Highway 18. It belonged to Asha. The location was roughly 20 to 30 miles north of where she had last been seen, depending on which reference point is used. The bag had been wrapped in 2 black plastic garbage bags. Inside were belongings associated with Asha. But investigators also found objects that did not appear to belong to her. One was a New Kids on the Block concert t-shirt. The other was a copy of Dr. Seuss's McElligot's Pool. The book was significant because it came from the library at Asha's school. The shirt was significant for the opposite reason. Asha's family did not recognize it as hers. That created a strange puzzle. If Asha had packed her own bag, why was someone else's clothing inside? And if someone else had handled the bag later, why was it buried? The backpack did not answer those questions. It created more of them. Years passed. The investigation never formally disappeared, but public information became scarce. The Degree family continued searching. Investigators continued receiving tips. And in 2014, Detective Tim Adams came out of retirement to work on the case. In 2015, the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, FBI, and North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation began a renewed examination of the evidence. The objective was not simply to repeat the original investigation. It was to ask whether modern technology could extract information from evidence collected decades earlier. The case generated hundreds of leads. The FBI also deployed its Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team in 2017. Still, the central mystery remained. Where had Asha gone? And why? Then investigators began looking differently at the old evidence. The backpack had always been important. But modern forensic testing gave it new significance. According to the later search warrants, investigators identified DNA associated with two people connected to the same local family. One was Anna Lee Dedman Ramirez. The other was Russell Bradley Underhill. A hair found on clothing in Asha's backpack reportedly produced a DNA result that investigators said matched Anna Lee Dedman Ramirez. Another DNA profile was associated with Underhill. Underhill was not described as a Dedman family member. But investigators found that he had connections to facilities operated by Roy and Connie Dedman. And that connection would become central to the next phase of the investigation. Roy and Connie Dedman lived in Cleveland County around the time Asha disappeared. They had 3 daughters: Anna, Lee, Lizzie, and Sarah. Investigators began examining the family's history and properties. There was an important geographical connection. The Dedmans operated facilities connected with patient care. And Highway 18, the same general highway associated with Asha's disappearance and the later discovery of her backpack, was part of the route between some of those locations. Investigators also learned that the Dedman daughters had transported patients in the area. None of this, by itself, proves involvement in Asha's disappearance. That point is critical. A location connection is not proof of a crime. DNA association is not automatically proof of how DNA arrives somewhere. And being named in a search warrant does not mean a person has been convicted, or even charged. But investigators believed the collection of evidence was significant enough to seek warrants. And in September 2024, they did. Multiple properties connected to the Dedman family were searched. The FBI participated. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation participated. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office participated. 8 search warrants were executed. And then the public learned something that fundamentally changed how the case was being investigated. The affidavit said investigators believed Asha was the victim of a homicide and that her body had been concealed. This was not a courtroom verdict. It was an investigative theory documented in applications for search warrants. But it was a major departure from the way the public had understood the case for more than 2 decades. And suddenly, evidence that once seemed mysterious began to look different. The backpack. The DNA. The green vehicle. The geography. The people connected to the locations. Investigators were no longer simply searching for a missing girl. They were investigating the possibility that someone had killed her and concealed what happened afterward. Among the evidence seized in September 2024 was a green 1964 AMC Rambler. At first glance, that might sound like an ordinary old car. But investigators had been looking for years for a green vehicle that witnesses associated with Asha's disappearance. The original lead described a 1970s-era Ford Thunderbird or Lincoln Continental Mark IV. The Rambler was from 1964. So it was not the same model. But investigators noted that it had similar features. And according to the warrants, the vehicle had connections to the Dedman family. It was also reportedly driven by one of the daughters around the time Asha disappeared. That did not establish that this was the vehicle seen near Asha. It did not establish that Asha ever entered it. But it created another connection investigators considered important enough to investigate. The old vehicle lead suddenly had a real-world object attached to it. A vehicle had been found. It was in the possession of people investigators were already examining. And it had similarities to the vehicle described years earlier. The problem? Similarity is not identification. And that distinction would matter. Investigators also found that one of the people whose DNA was associated with Asha's belongings, Russell Underhill, had died in 2004. That meant investigators could not simply interview him today. He could not explain the DNA. He could not explain where he had been. He could not answer whether he had ever encountered Asha. And he could not explain what happened to the backpack. That created a difficult evidentiary problem. A dead person can become an important link in an investigation. But they cannot become a witness. The Dedman family's attorney said Roy Dedman denied involvement or knowledge of Asha's disappearance. The attorney also said the connection between the family and the case was weak. And no one in the family had been charged. So investigators had evidence pointing toward a possible connection. But they still needed to establish exactly what that connection meant. In October 2024, investigators obtained a warrant to examine Lizzie Foster's iCloud account. What they found became part of the next set of search warrants. On February 13, 2025, one day before the 25th anniversary of Asha's disappearance, investigators seized phones belonging to Roy Dedman, Lizzie Foster, and Sarah Capel. The warrants said investigators believed the devices could contain evidence of felony obstruction of justice. Again, this was probable cause for a search. It was not a criminal conviction. But the documents contained communications that investigators considered significant. One message sent after the September 2024 searches said, "The theory is I did it. Accident. Covered it up." Another message said, "I caused this." Those statements are striking. But they also require context. They were written after investigators had begun searching the family's properties. They reflected what the writer believed investigators were thinking. They do not, by themselves, establish what happened in 2000. That distinction is easy to lose when a case becomes emotionally charged. But it is precisely the distinction an investigation has to preserve. A statement can be suspicious without being a confession. A message can be evidence without proving the underlying crime. And an investigator can believe a theory without having proven it. Then investigators received another piece of information. A man came forward and told investigators that he had known the Dedman sisters socially in the mid-2000s. He described attending parties with them. According to his account, Lizzie Foster was intoxicated and upset during one gathering. He told investigators that she repeatedly said, "I killed Asha Degree." He also said Sarah became angry and told her to stop talking. The witness said he was confident in what he remembered. Investigators gave him a polygraph examination. The warrant materials said he passed. But there is another important qualification. Polygraph results are not admissible as evidence in North Carolina courts. And the alleged confession itself remains a witness account, not a courtroom-tested admission. There is no conviction. There is no criminal charge. And there is no judicial finding that the statement was true. So what does it mean? It means investigators received information that they considered sufficiently significant to include in subsequent warrant applications. Nothing more should be claimed from it. By this point, investigators were building a theory. But it was not a theory about one isolated clue. It was a theory involving several pieces. Asha disappeared. She was seen walking along Highway 18. A green vehicle became part of the investigation. Her backpack was later discovered far away. Items inside the backpack appeared to have belonged to other people. DNA evidence reportedly connected some of those items to people associated with the Dedman family. A vehicle associated with the family had similarities to the vehicle investigators had been seeking. The family had geographical connections to Highway 18. Later witness information and electronic communications added another layer. And investigators concluded that Asha had likely been killed and her body concealed. But there was still a missing piece. The most important one. Where is Asha? For 26 years, investigators have never recovered Asha's body. That fact matters enormously. Because without the body, investigators have been forced to reconstruct the crime through circumstances. What happened to her? Where? When? Who is responsible? And what happened afterward? The absence of remains does not automatically mean a homicide cannot be proven. But it creates an enormous investigative challenge. There is no scene to examine today. No medical examination of the victim. No direct determination of cause of death. No physical remains to connect to a specific location. Instead, investigators have to build a chain. And every link has to survive scrutiny. That is why the case has moved so slowly. Not necessarily because there is no evidence, but because evidence and proof are different things. The investigation did not stop after the February 2025 phone searches. In April, law enforcement searched another property in Lincoln County in connection with the case. By then, investigators had searched homes, properties, buildings, electronic devices and vehicles connected to their investigation. The pattern was unmistakable. The case was active. The authorities were still working. But there was still no arrest and there was still no recovered body. This is where the story has to slow down. Because the most compelling version of the Asha Degree case is not the version where every clue magically fits. It is the version where we acknowledge what each clue can, and cannot, tell us. We know Asha disappeared. That is established. She left her home sometime between approximately 2:30 and 6:30 in the morning. We have witness reports placing a girl matching her description on Highway 18. That is part of the investigative record. We know her backpack was later found far from her home. That is physical evidence. We know objects inside it did not all belong to her. That raises questions about who handled the bag and when. We know investigators later identified DNA associations involving people connected to the Dedman family. That evidence was important enough to support search warrants. We know investigators publicly stated in 2024 that they believed Asha was the victim of a homicide and that her body had been concealed. That is the current investigative theory. We know several members of the Dedman family have been identified in the warrants, but they have not been convicted. We know their attorney has denied involvement, and no one has been charged. We know the investigation continued into 2025 and remained active in 2026. And Asha has still not been found. We don't know exactly why Asha left her house. We don't know who, if anyone, she intended to meet. We don't know whether the green vehicle described by witnesses was the vehicle associated with the Dedman family. We don't know exactly how the DNA reached the items in Asha's belongings. We don't know precisely what happened to Asha after the last confirmed sightings. We don't know where her body is. And we don't know whether the investigative theory eventually described in court documents will result in criminal charges. Those aren't minor details. They are the heart of the case. On February 14, 2026, 26 years had passed since Asha disappeared. Her classmates were adults. The investigators who first searched for her had aged, retired, or died. Technology had transformed the way missing person investigations were conducted. But one thing had not changed. Asha had never come home. The Degree family continued to hold annual prayer walks around the anniversary of her disappearance. Her parents have continued to express hope. And authorities have continued asking the public for information. By 2025, the combined reward had grown to $100,000 for information leading to an arrest and conviction. That number is not simply a reward. It is a measure of how badly investigators still need one thing they have never had: someone who knows what happened. For years, the defining image of the Asha Degree case was a 9-year-old girl walking alone beside a highway before sunrise. But the investigation has changed the meaning of that image. If Asha left voluntarily, then the mystery is why. If someone persuaded her to leave, then the mystery becomes who, and how. If she entered a vehicle, then the mystery becomes where it took her. And if investigators are right that she was killed and her body concealed, then the most important question is no longer why she left. It is what happened during the hours after she disappeared. That is the part of the story nobody has been able to reconstruct completely. And that is why the case remains open. There is a temptation with a case like this to look at the recent evidence and declare that the mystery is finally solved. But it isn't. The warrants changed the investigation. They did not resolve it. The DNA changed the direction of the case. It did not tell investigators everything that happened. The green vehicle created a possible connection. It did not establish that it was the vehicle that carried Asha away. The messages and alleged confession gave investigators new information. They did not produce a conviction. And the searches produced evidence of investigative interest. They did not bring Asha home. As of August 2026, no one has been arrested or charged in connection with Asha Degree's disappearance, and she has never been found. 26 years ago, a 9-year-old girl walked out of her home. Somewhere between that bedroom and the last confirmed sighting on Highway 18, the known story ends. Everything after that has been reconstruction, evidence, theory, memory, and questions. The most important question remains the simplest: